It's been months since Axel Rudakabana stabbed multiple little girls at a Taylor Swift dance party, maiming many and murdering 3. Just this week, he finally pleaded guilty to all charges, but wait until you hear why our dear leader Keir Starmer believes Jeff Bezos of Amazon is actually to blame. In the immediate aftermath of the horrific incident, Prime Minister Keir Starmer deflected attention from this terrorist attack by blaming Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, and the apparent far right. This led to mass hysteria in a people who predominantly believed the words of its leader, no matter how insipid he might be. Vast Antifa rallies marched through the cities, calling to cut the throats of Zionists. Read Jew. And then, when the imaginary far right didn't turn up because they don't exist in great numbers in the UK, the aggressive Jew-hating mobs didn't come to the realisation that they'd been lied to about the threat of the far right, but instead turned that into some sort of victory against their imaginary foe. Now, aside from deflection, there was another reason for Keir Starmer's shifty approach. Since getting into power, Starmer has been obsessed with controlling the media and the narrative around him. It goes without saying, although I will do, that many Muslims are peace-loving and want nothing to do with the likes of Rudakabana in particular, or any other terrorists. That said, it is believed that 10% of the 2 billion Muslims in the world really do align themselves with such terrorism. However, Starmer knew that a focus on the Islamism involved in the terror attack would do nothing to help him bring in censorship of his critics. By shifting the gaze to Musk and the tweets of Farage and Robinson, Starmer was able to make this a free speech issue. He believes that we have too much of it, at least online. He's been locking people up for saying things he doesn't like, or things that are relatively harmful, but for which we should not be locked up. Since Rudakabana pleaded guilty to acts of terrorism, Keir Starmer has now taken to blaming not just Musk and X, but surprisingly, Jeff Bezos at Amazon. He claimed this was a new kind of terrorism, online terrorism, which is news to those of us who have been used to exactly this kind of terrorism for at least 20 or 30 years. And that the real problem, he said, wasn't the Al-Qaeda manuals or a destructive ideology, but that Rudakabana was able to buy a knife from Amazon. So yet again, Starmer has decided to use this as a way to attack the freedoms of the internet and his imaginary foes, the far right. This time he blamed the internet for providing a terrorist with a knife, something he could otherwise have taken from a kitchen drawer. In attacking the alternative media and the online domain, Keir also gets the mainstream media on board, and this is essential. This is a huge part of what is going on, and it is why the newspapers are so in line at the moment with one another across the political spectrum. He gets the mainstream media on board because we're in a weird, interesting and unprecedented situation right now. The media has long been fighting for free speech. Usually newspapers are all about that. But the legacy media is now under threat from its competitors online. I mean that from a business perspective. A third of news is now consumed through social media. Now this means that they are chomping at the bit not only to join Starmer in quashing dissent in the alternative media space online, but also to side with him and praise him. Months after the stabbing attack, we now know that Rudakabana had Islamist manuals and the toxic substance ricin. He had been reported to the government-adjacent terrorism programme Prevent several times, but Prevent, like Keir Starmer, has been accused of focusing too much attention and time on the far right, giving Islamism something of a free ride, at least in this circumstance. And by the way, everyone involved, from the prosecutor, the defence, the politicians, the mainstream media, is saying this has nothing to do with any kind of terrorism and any kind of Islamism, which is palpably untrue for this second-generation immigrant who had Islamist material with him. And I'll get on to the other material he had and why it is both relevant and irrelevant. Now, were the media and politicians more alert to the Islamist threat and less obsessed with locking people up for hurty words, the deaths of these little girls could have been avoided. Take a moment to think of that. I have a really important point to make that I've not heard anyone else make yet. But first, I want to explain that this is exactly why I use Ground News, one of my favourite sponsors because it aligns with my values. That's really important for a creator. I use it to find out what people outside of my bubble are saying, thinking and writing. I use it to get an idea, in this case, of how different sides reported on the Southport attack. We can see that around 90 sources are reporting on this story, and it's fascinating to see that a lefty publication like the New Statesman goes with Keir Starmer is right, while the Daily Express, which is further right, went with Nigel Farage exploding at the Prime Minister for covering up the Southport murders. They also provide reports about the factuality of the sources, which speaks on the reliability of a source and the speed of their corrections. After looking at these headlines, let me know in reply to my pinned comment which you agree with as New Statesman or the Daily Express, and go to Ground News to see how this story has been reported across the spectrum. Ground News is my only way to get unbiased news. Subscribe through ground.news/Andrew for 40% off unlimited access this month. And here is the main alternative point that they're making that I would like to dissect. From painstakingly seeking out the alternative view on why Keir Starmer refuses to call Axel Rudakabana's murderous rampage an Islamic or Islamist terrorist attack, I have found many news publications on Ground News speaking of the other material that he possessed beside Al-Qaeda manuals. These included a lot of Nazi and incel propaganda. My first point here is that Nazism is intrinsically linked to Islamism, which every Jew on earth now knows, every Westerner now knows. Islamism has pretty much, in some respects, replaced Nazism as the biggest threat to the safety of Jews and the West. Furthermore, there is a reason, as Tommy Robinson explained to me on our podcast together, why incel champion Andrew Tate converted so publicly to Islam, because inceldom is a huge issue in Islam due to the beliefs about women. The second point to make here is that equating Islam to inceldom and Nazism is not quite the win that the woke think it is. Like, oh, look, here's the Islam stuff with the incel and the Nazi stuff. So that's, it's all the things are bad in that case, and they need to be spoken about. Quite simply, we would not be happy if our country were importing hundreds of thousands of proud Nazis and incels to our country. We do, however, bring in that many Muslims every year from countries that, according to Pew Research, have 97 to 99% rates of feeling unfavourable about Jews. No liberal-minded person should want Nazis or incels in our country. It is not a good sign, then, that Islamist material was found alongside Nazi and incel material in Rudakabana's possession. And the fact that our dear leader still refuses to call this out, as stabbings take place across Europe at increasing rates, and instead he focuses on limiting criticism against him by curbing the freedoms of the internet, just shows what authoritarian, West-hating hell we are in. What do you think? Let me know below. Hit that like, and remember to check out Ground News to see both sides of the story. The link is below.